The rebirth and rejuvenation of the Justice Society, and one of my absolute favorite comic book runs of all time. It started right here. This is JSA number 1 through 4. Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they are special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think even spoiled, the stories I feature are still well worth reading. At this point in the series, we're changing gears for just a bit, and instead of focusing on big crossover events, we've been looking at the revival of two super teams in the DC universe. Last time, we looked at issues 1 through 4 of JLA, Justice League of America, and now we're looking at the ironically less famous super team, the Justice Society of America. I say ironically less famous because the JSA was actually the first superhero comic series to bring together heroes who started with their own books back in the, I want to say, early 1940s, when it was the Justice Society of America. Both in publishing and DC Universe history, the team has its origins during World War II. As time has passed, they've been kept around in various ways. For a time, they existed on a parallel Earth where World War II never ended, but raged on for decades. Then, when Crisis on Infinite Earths combined all the timelines, they were said to have been kept young through various magical or comic booky circumstances. When JSA launched in 1999, only a few of the original members were still alive. Some had recently been killed in the zero-hour crossover event that I covered earlier in this series. Others remained alive and in seemingly the early years of senior citizenship, at least physically. I'm mainly going to talk about the first 4 issues of JSA, although the 4th does end on a cliffhanger that starts a new story. This trend of kind of ending on a cliffhanger and leading right into the next one continues for one arc after another, as the first 3.5 years about this series was conducting an almost systematic revival of dozens of classic Golden Age heroes and villains, giving them new vibrancy and tasteful, I think, updates to bring them to modern readers while still firmly rooting them in their historic legacies and contexts. So in talking about the first 4 issues, I'm really largely going to be talking about what made the series as a whole appealing to me. It was a book that constantly reminded me of the unparalleled richness and length of the DC Universe's history, and made me glad that when I made the choice at one point to really just kind of stick with, invest in, and get to know a single comic universe, I chose DC. All that to say that if you are interested in the JSA, after hearing me blab a bit right now, you'll find a rewarding introduction or reintroduction to the golden age of the DC Universe if you continue reading the rest of this series. But for now, let's look at the first 4 issues of JSA launching in 1999. So starting with issue number 1, I'm not going to be taking as deep a dive into this story as I have in other stories in this series because talking about JSA here, it's not really about this first 4-issue story arc. I'm just using this as a jumping off point to kind of talk about the series as a whole, really. At the beginning of the story, we have a mysterious figure that is hunting down Kid Eternity, which is kind of like a, who's who, 3rd, 4th, 5th tier character, hero in the DC universe. And we don't see this shadowy figure stalking him, but we do see that ultimately he gets the better of Kid Eternity and seems then ready to move on and go after some other heroes, or at least anyone that will stand in the way of his mysterious goals. Then we see that someone is kind of narrating their own dream sequence. It's Sanderson Hawkins, and he's reliving what it was like back in like the 30s as the sidekick of Wesley Dodds, the original Sandman. And at that time, Sanderson went by the name Sandy the Golden Boy, and he says in the narration, dumb name, I know, but it worked with the times. And that's kind of something that this series does. At this point, in these first 4 issues, it's not being written by Jeff Johns yet, but it would be very soon after this story arc. And something that Jeff Johns did really well throughout this whole series was take these old ideas, these characters that come from an age that just looks corny to us right now, and acknowledges the corniness of that and finds ways to kind of accept the corniness and make it cool. And oftentimes that's done by kind of reinterpreting the reasons for things that at a glance look corny. Much later on in the series, he would take the emblem on the chest of the Crimson Avenger, which looks like a starburst, and basically say, you know, everybody thought this was like a sunburst or a starburst, and it's not. It's a big bullet hole in his chest, symbolic of just kind of like this figure who had died, been fatally wounded, and it was come back as an Avenger now. So anyway, Sandy's having these strange dreams, which is something we learn his mentor did, but his mentor, he already kind of realizes because of the dream he's had, his mentor Wesley Dodds, the original Sandman, is now dead. So a number of heroes show up for his memorial service, mostly original Justice Society members or people that have connections to them, like people that are carrying on the torch and in some way reusing the name of a former Justice Society member. Maybe that's a daughter or a former sidekick or something like that. And so while attending this memorial service, we get this brief introduction to various members of the Justice Society or people that were connected to original members. One of those members there is Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern in DC publishing history. And we get kind of like a foreshadowing scene about his son Todd. He has two kids that are grown adults now, Todd and Jenny Lynn. Jenny Lynn is the hero Jade, and Todd was the hero Obsidian. But when we cut to Todd, it seems he's in something of a haunted state, talking to someone in a diner that isn't there, and clearly dealing with some internal demons of some kind. And this is just a thread to a storyline that would be picked up after this initial story arc. Anyway, we come back to the funeral, and a portal opens, and this really edgy-looking dude named Fate comes out, and he is dying and says Wesley Dodds didn't die of natural causes, he was murdered, and they murdered me too, and then he falls dead. Now, this guy was an attempt to take the concept of Dr. Fate and make him cool and edgy in that very 90s kind of overhaul that they were doing to a number of heroes during this time. But JSA was maybe one of, if not the first book in DC's lineup to say, you know, we're going to embrace the corniness and recontextualize it instead of just trying to revamp everybody into this dark, edgy, trench coat wearing type of thing. We are going to create a new context and perspective on some of these visual designs and characters that at a glance seem overly simplistic and corny. And by killing Fate here, they almost seem to, in a meta way, be signaling that, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. We are embracing what we once called outmoded and outdated. We're embracing this again, and we're going to do something fresh with it. So then some Egyptian zombies show up called the Sons of Anubis, and you know, who knows what they're up to. They're trying to, well, I mean, ultimately they're trying to stop the Fate child from being born or some crap like that. I don't really remember. Even after just having read this, the actual story itself is not super compelling, but it introduces these characters and establishes what this series is going to be, and that's what's really valuable about it to me. Now, early on, there is some dialogue here that I seem to remember improving, maybe when Jeff Johns came on board, but, you know, they do have their work cut out for them, providing some exposition. We've got a character who once was known as Nuklon, who was, I think, the child he was the godson of the original Adam, who was just kind of a short guy that I think eventually they gave some low-level super strength to, low-level super punching to, or something like that. But this guy had the ability to grow really big and called himself Nuklon. Well, now they've kind of recontextualized him, created a new motivation for him where he feels the desire to carry on the legacy of the original Adam, and so he has changed his name to Adam Smasher. But the introduction that he gives in the middle of fighting is a little bit kind of awkward and clunky and expositional. You know, should have done this a long time ago for Al Pratt and Terry Curtis. The name's Adam Smasher now. And I'm like, you're in the middle of like a bunch of kung fu superhero fighting and you're doing this expositional thing. So it reads pretty awkwardly to me today. But either it didn't at the time or I just accepted it for what it was. I don't remember dialogue being clunky after this. So But I don't know, maybe that's rose-tinted lenses. They did some cool stuff, though, in some of these replacement characters, like Hourman is one who, actually that character was introduced in, I believe, the DC 1 million story, where they were going like a million issues of time into the future. And that's where we get this Hourman from the future that is actually this super intelligent machine colony. It's kind of like nanites that make up basically an android, and he has the power to manipulate time. And so the original Hourman took a pill and had moderate super strength and super speed for an hour, but this version of Hourman is much more powerful, and that just follows that trend of DC characters in general these days, you know, starting in this era and after, really being hugely powerful and kind of godlike. But then you do still have characters like the original Wildcat, who is essentially just a boxer, although we do get indications later on that, actually no, it was in the JLA story, where we find out he picked up 9 lives at some point. He had some kind of like a magic occult experience, or I don't know what it was. He doesn't explain it, but, you know, he says at some point along the way he picked up 9 lives, like literally 9 lives. And so even though he's mostly just a normal boxer, you know, like, and he was the world's greatest boxer for decades, I think. He also has 9 lives, and then they actually do use up at least a few of those in the run of this series. But still, he's largely this street-level character, and somehow they make these different kinds of characters work together in really interesting ways. In fact, there's a story early in this run featuring Wildcat, where all the other heroes are off on some adventure or something, and he is holding the fort by himself, with like wearing 2 casts because of brutal injuries that he took in one of these adventures, I think maybe in this first 4-issue story arc. And he has to, in diehard fashion, all by himself, defend the Justice Society headquarters from the return of the Injustice Society. And it's really very cool, diehard inspired one-shot issue all about Wildcat. And I was just sold on this character after that. There is a version of Wonder Woman that's part of the Justice Society, at least a reserve member, and the way they work that out is to say that for a little while, Hippolyta, who is actually Wonder Woman's mother, came and was serving as Wonder Woman during World War II, but in a very kind of like under-the-radar kind of way. And since she is immortal, you know, she hasn't aged at all, and so she's able to actually, now and then in this series, come back. I think they do call her Hippolyta and not Wonder Woman, but she's able to come back and kind of serve as Wonder Woman in the Justice Society, just like in actual publishing history, Wonder Woman was a part of the Justice Society during that 1940s era. Then in issue 2, this mysterious figure called the Scarab shows up and gives them a bunch of mysterious exposition about how basically Dr. Fate is about to be reborn in one of several babies around the world, and so the JSA has to split up into teams to go figure out which one of them is destined to house the soul of the new Dr. Fate. And overhearing this meeting with the bigwigs of the JSA is Courtney, the new Star-Spangled Kid, who I initially did not like. She really grew on me over the course of the series as kind of like this, the youngest member, well, for a while at least, she was the youngest member, who really wants to be like these other heroes, wants to be equal to them, a colleague in their ranks, but is just so inexperienced. And she really does grow over the course of the series and gets some new abilities and stuff, and ultimately carries the mantle of not just the Star-Spangled Kid, but the original Starman himself. And now I've seen maybe one episode, didn't stick with it because I don't like how CW makes their superhero shows for the most part. But yeah, there's a CW show called Stargirl that has to do with her and the Justice Society. If that makes you curious at all, you can check it out. There's a neat little exchange here between the new modern kind of edgy Vertigo version of Starman, who actually I don't think is in JSA beyond this. They had the Star-Spangled Kid kind of be the stand-in for the original Starman instead, and he went off to go, I guess, do more Vertigo-type stories. But anyway, the modern Starman is teamed up with Jay Garrick, the original Flash, and they realize they have to chase a friend who went into the water, and Jay says, "Ever read the Bible?" And, he's this guy from the 1940s, and Jack's like, no, he's Mr. Postmodern, certainly not Christian. And then Jay says, "Ever see the Ten Commandments?" And then Jack Starman realizes what he's doing and is like, cool, one cool old man. And so there's this neat kind of connection between generations. And that's something that we ideally should be seeing in our churches too, like not segmented into age groups, but like these different generations being able to work together, to do ministry together, to befriend each other, to learn from each other. It's just neat seeing these different generations cooperating together. And, of course, also cool to see Jay Garrick do a cool Flash thing and by force of super speed, split the waters. But as cool as that duo was, they were not the ones that found the Fate Child, so we cut to another group who comes to what they think must be, it's the only baby left, but they walk into the hospital room where it's just been born, and it's being whisked away by what is apparently a new Hawk Girl. Kendra Saunders, the new Hawk Girl, is a really interesting character. In the revival of the Hawks, both Hawk Girl and Hawkman would come later in the series. We just stick with Hawk Girl for a while. I think they really wanted to establish her first, which I think was a cool move, to establish her independent of Hawkman as her own character and not just like a female add-on, a female equivalent, but really to give her her own story and her own focus for a while first. I think was a cool move. But they do some interesting things involving like this curse of reincarnation on specifically Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and how they, as their origin is revamped, discover that they are actually this couple from ancient Egypt that is cursed to always die together once they find each other in their new lives. Once they find each other and fall in love, then that begins the countdown to their next deaths. So that story, it's not explored in these first 4 issues, but I just mentioned that now just to kind of highlight some of the cool things that they do with these characters and some emotional motivations that they add to them. And like this is a very kind of emotional tragedy involved in these 2 characters, a romance that is destined to work out. They are destined to be together. So it's a sweeping, epic romance across the ages, right? But they are destined to also end in tragedy. Their romance is destined to end in tragedy. But what's cool about the Kendra Saunders thing is like her reincarnation was like a botched reincarnation or something that was a little bit weird, because the actual Kendra Saunders, we learn, committed suicide, but her spirit, when it vacated her body, the spirit of the original Kendra Saunders then inhabited it. Instead of it happening at birth, it happened like in the middle of this person's life. They committed suicide, their spirit left, and then so her memories are all weird and mixed up, memories of both Kendra and of the original Shiera, I think Saunders was her name. So when Hawkman shows up and is like, yes, we're destined to be together, she's like, I'm not so sure of that, because her memories are conflicting. Her memories of her previous lives are not awakened in the same way that Carter Hall's were. And so it's this neat romance that's meant to be, but Hawkman actually has to like woo her and win her over all over again from scratch, because her memories aren't awakened like his are. And so it's a really cool kind of romantic arc. And man, I could go off on Hourman for a while. Not this version of Hourman. Eventually he's replaced with the son of the original Hourman, who the original Hourman has died now, but what we discover with the new Hourman, his son, is that he has this kind of like hour of power, but instead of, well, one of his abilities, he has a couple different things that are based on an hour. Like one is he gets like super strength and stuff for an hour, or like actually I think he always has super strength, and then for 1 hour he gets like really great super strength or something. I don't know. They kind of upgraded his power level in general. But then there's this other thing where he can go and talk to his dad to get counsel from his dad, to get advice from his dad, because his dad is kind of like in this pocket of time where he is living for 1 hour until he leaves that pocket and goes back to right before the moment he dies. And so his son has this 1 hour, and he can keep visiting. Every time he visits his dad, that hour resumes. And then when he leaves, his dad, time for him is frozen in that pocket dimension. But his son, the new Hour Man, can come and visit him anytime to get counsel. Like, we're facing this revived maniac that you guys fought. What did you do back then? What do you advise we do now? So it's this critical time that he has. He has 1 hour to be with his dad, but he's torn between, of course, getting the advice that he wants to get from his dad that'll help freaking save the world. But then also he has this opportunity, this 1 hour, every time he visits him to get advice. At the same time, he's like torn between spending that time to get advice and spending that time to be with his dad again after having lost him, So there's this great emotion and this great value of the family that is recurring throughout this run of JSA. The idea of found families and stuff, I don't want to poo-poo that because there is some legitimacy to that, but I think we take a wrong turn in the concept of found families when we embrace found families instead of investing in the families that we have, the biological families that we have, that we can still reconcile with, that we can still develop healthier and healthier loving relationships with. And in addition to kind of the found family aspect of JSA in this run, they also honored and valued traditional or biological family members and reconciliation between them. And there's just some beautiful stuff that goes on that has to do with family relationships, father-daughter, father-son, some sibling relationship stuff too. Just some beautiful stuff in this book that I just wasn't seeing anywhere else in comic books. So anyway, issue 3 now, the villain has been revealed. His name is Mordru, the Dark Lord. He's this really powerful, immortal sorcerer. He's actually, I think, at this point, better known as a Legion of Superheroes villain, but what we discover in this story is that he's immortal, and so this isn't him time traveling. This is him as he was during this era, just kind of surfacing and trying to do his evil conquer the universe thing. And what he wants to do is inherit the vestments, the magical artifacts of Dr. Fate and all the power that comes with them. And so he's trying to stop the Fate Child from becoming the new vessel of Dr. Fate. So stuff is going down. I mean, this Mordru is super powerful, and so the whole Justice Society, even up against him, is having trouble. He takes the fight into this otherworldly magic dimension where the rules of reality don't apply anymore, and so it's crazy, like all-powerful bad guy type of stuff going on. And Courtney, Star-Spangled Girl, approaches the vestments of fate, which seem to be calling out to her, and then she gets pulled into them and discovers inside that Kent Nelson and his wife Inza, who both carried the mantle of Dr. Fate at different times, are living in there. Similar to the way I described a moment ago about the original Hour Man kind of living in this pocket dimension, we find here, before that story ever came about, that Kent and Inza, the original Dr. Fates, are here in this, inside the amulet, living in some kind of spiritual pocket dimension, and they would be accessible by the new Dr. Fate going forward as a source of wisdom. And so again, there's this respect of the older generation and what has come before, which unfortunately the New 52 just completely did away with when they seemingly decided to kill off anybody that was over the age of like 40. So this was the beginning of just a wonderful time of seeing these different generations benefiting from spending time and investing in life and sharing goals together. Then finally, in issue 4, they distract Mordru just long enough for this reincarnated spirit, whose identity they still don't know yet, to inhabit the Fate Child, and then the vestments of fate came onto the Fate Child and accelerated its biological age to properly fill out the costume. And now we have this full-grown new Dr. Fate wearing the golden helmet, so we can't see their face, going up against Mordru, and it's like two huge, awesome wizards fighting each other. Anyway, Mordru gets defeated, and the new Dr. Fate reveals himself as Hector Hall. And I'm thinking, who the crap is Hector Hall? I have no idea. Well, Hector is the son of the original Hawkman and Hawkgirl, so he kind of has this weirdly inherited version of the curse that they have to be reincarnated, and so now he is the new Dr. Fate. He had originally been this hero in Infinity Incorporated, which was kind of a JSA Junior, a Justice Society Junior. It was a super team made up of former sidekicks or children of original Justice Society members. And so in some ways, this JSA book is actually kind of honoring the legacy of the original Justice Society, and then also members of Infinity Incorporated, and kind of using them wherever possible to be, new versions of classic JSA members in this book. But anyway, rather than bring Hector Hall back as this Silver Scarab concept that he used to be, they decided they're going to bring him back as the new Dr. Fate. And the way they tie it together is cool. I mean, we do eventually learn that there's a connection between Dr. Fate and ancient Egypt, as is slightly evidenced by his somewhat revamped costume. They've added this sort of riveted brass collar almost. If you are watching the video version, you can see what it looks like. But the Dr. Fate costume didn't used to have that detail, and now it's just a little bit aesthetically evocative of kind of ancient Egypt designs that you would see on like royalty. Anyway, after this adventure that brought them together, they decide, you know what, let's make this official. Let's restart the Justice Society. And Sanderson, formerly Sandy the Golden Boy, now who goes by Sand, is nominated by the original Green Lantern to be the first chairman and just kind of lead the team. And it's a really cool moment, but then Sand starts to feel kind of funny. We're not sure what's going on, and he holds on to his wrist. His skin starts looking a little bit funny, and then he starts dissolving into sand. I didn't mention this, but earlier in the story they established that he had been kept young because of a situation back in the 40s, an adventure with the original Sandman that turned him into a sand monster temporarily. And so they kind of retcon and say that that experience kept him young up to this point, but it seemed like that condition had been fixed. Well, now we discovered, no, that condition was just kind of laying dormant, and now in some way Sand is able to turn into sand. And that's really explored in issue number 5, where he gets a handle on his powers, he gets a new costume, and it just rolls on from there. Every issue or few issues is a new arc or a new one-shot that focuses on a particular member of the Justice Society or an incoming member of the Justice Society, reestablishes them, and tells you why they're cool. And that went on for 3.5 years. It was great. And even after that, this was a series for years that was just a joy to come back to, that just felt different from any other book that DC was publishing. And in a really great way that, as I said, honored family, honored multiple generations, honored the idea of finding wisdom in those that are older than you. And sure, like so many comics that bring so many different character concepts together, especially those that have supernatural aspects, there's some weird relativistic stuff in there. It's not pushed really hard. Like I said, even with the reincarnation stuff, it was easy to treat that in my headcanon as a curse that was specific to these few people, not a universal principle that all experience reincarnation. On the whole, it was just a great book to read with an undercurrent of valuing some things that I think are worth us valuing, especially in today's churches where very often programs are divvied up by age group, despite the fact that there's so many ways we can benefit by sharing the same room with people of different seasons of life than us. Anyway, if you decide to read these first 4 issues of JSA for yourself, I want to recommend a read of JLA issues 28 through 31 first. It's a story called Crisis Times 5, which in the JLA book serves as a sort of prelude to this JSA series, bringing several key members of the JSA out of retirement to help the JLA. You don't need to read it to get started with JSA number 1, but it will likely help you feel introduced and somewhat acquainted with the Golden Age Green Lantern, the Golden Age Flash, and Wildcat, the senior members of the JSA. You're also more likely to appreciate JSA if you are already vaguely familiar with some Justice Society members through past crossover events, such as those I've covered in this series so far. There's also a great comic story called The Golden Age, which is technically an Elseworlds story, but wasn't originally intended to be, and can pretty much be read as an intro to some core JSA characters. Next time, we'll jump forward 5 years in publishing history to a major DC crossover event that radically raised the bar for crossover event story writing, and without doing any sci-fi craziness with time warping or timeline merging, forever changed how we see the history of the DC universe, while also changing how DC books were written going forward. It's a story with iconic character moments, action, and heart-rending tragedy, exploring in new and deeper ways DC characters we've known for decades. It's a little hard to overhype this one, unless you're one of those folks who likes their superhero stories to stay light and jokey, in which case temper your expectations, this one won't be for you, but it's one of my favorite DC stories of all time. Come back next time as we take a look at Identity Crisis.